I encourage you to take a little time here to just welcome our new board members before we dig into all this content for orientation.
Yeah. Welcome new board members. So I've been on, this is my third year being part of boards. So the first year I was on Minneapolis and Minnesota, and I was president-elect, and this year president. And so welcome, Sean, and I know you're coming into a role. We put you on the spot during the meeting last week. Please give your financial, but anyways, Amy, see you, and obviously you're a experienced, skilled board member as well. But yeah, let's look at this year. And I think at one point, I don't know where I was, but I said sort of what I would want to do for this year, but it's really working with Mary Margaret. I know you have a lot of ideas and a lot of ways to enhance and augment and rethink how board membership actually is less about going through the motions of bylaws and Robert's rules, but how can we actually start making some impact and getting such a wide range of experiences and thoughts about how we can impact the profession and not only help staff and you guys operate and serve our profession, but how can we expand that beyond and make changes? So really, it's a continuation of a lot of the momentum that's already been built. And
Thanks so much.
yeah, but anyone else wants to add into that or introduce themselves? Or
yeah, and one of the things we've got on the next slide is a prompt that we've been asking folks in these orientations, and that is to introduce yourself, your workplace, your role on the board, and what you want the AIA Minnesota organization to be known for, and what you want the Minnesota architecture community to be known for. So we can go around the circle here. Amy, are you game to start?
I knew you were going to say that. I was the first one
sorry,
on. Yes,
my screen.
I am game to start. My name is Amy Kaler. I am starting with BWBR on Monday. Sorry, the first question. Oh, I am AIA Minnesota president-elect, so I will follow Sam. And run it by me again. What were
what you want AIA Minnesota as an organization to be known for, and what you want the Minnesota architecture community to be known for?
So AIA Minnesota to be known for what it's already known for, actually, I think excellence and equity. That's as one of the things that I'm really excited about to be president-elect is to really learn and hear from our membership and figure out, where their pain points are, what they're wanting to see, but really to listen and learn. But we've already shown, been a shining star in equity in a lot of different respects. And so, and that's a passion of mine. The AIA Minnesota community, or the Minnesota architecture community, again, excellence in design, but also excellence in climate change, and really understanding how the built environment needs to respond to climate change and what our role is, and be leaders in our changing role as architects due to climate change. That's it.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Just those things.
Do that in the first month or so.
Yeah, we'll be able to check those boxes real fast.
We're trying.
We're nothing but aspirational here.
Aspirational plus action. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost Patricia. But Kyle's here. Oh gosh, we lost both of them at once, and now I think they're both joining.
Oh,
hi, Kyle.
Kyle's outside.
Kyle, are you able and game to go next? Look at you out there in the snow.
Sure, why not? I'm queued up now. I'm good. Yeah, I would say, so I'm Kyle, I'm an architect with Alliance. I would say that I just want AIA Minnesota to be known. So by the broad community and all the great things that we do, but specifically the public, I think, and that kind of relates to the second question. Just the architecture Minnesota community, just known for the great architecture that we create and the ways in which we're helping to positively impact policy in the state. And yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. Anand.
Yeah, good morning. I'm here today because I missed the local board orientation last week. And since you said that the two programs are pretty much the same, I guess it's good that I'm here because I missed the last week's thing. So
All good.
As far as the two questions, I would like the Minnesota board to be remembered for the 4 strategic priorities that we have put on the table. And if we make significant progress with all 4 of those, I'm sure not just the architects, but the overall Minnesota public will also remember the AIA board. So that is what I want the AIA board to be able to do. I know it's difficult to make full progress in 1 year. It's a multi-year strategic plan, but I want to see 2023 to make significant progress towards all 4 of those strategic plans. And as far as the Minnesota architects themselves, I do not believe there's equity in the profession right now. So I am a little skeptical. I think we need to move along to make this profession of ours much more equitable in terms of diversity. For example, if I walk into an architect's office in Minnesota, I would see very few African-American licensed architects. Those kind of things bother me, and I would like to see more equity in the built environment from year to year. Here again, I don't think this can be accomplished just in 2023, but I want to see some progress made every single year.
Great. Thank you, Anand. Sean.
Hey, y'all. So many friendly faces that I know already, so it's good. It's just Sean Higgins, I use he, him pronouns. I'm an architect at MSR Design, the incoming, officially now, my first meeting, treasurer, that I'll be brushing up on Rob's rules just to make sure I get everything just right. As far as AIA Minnesota goes, like Amy and everybody already alluded to, we're already kind of at the forefront of the charge for equity, inclusion, and justice in the built environment, and kind of setting the tone for what needs to happen to change the profession. I think, I was having a conversation with peers last night about how do we achieve the goals that we set that are quite lofty. And I like that here our approach is to not replicate previous habits, that we're trying to think strategically and structurally about issues, and ensuring that consensus building is centered in that, because we need everybody moving in the same direction. So I think building on that and achieving language that gets everybody on board with what our perspectives are, and how we think we can make a better profession for all, is something I'm very interested in, especially from a financial perspective, which tends to be the biggest barrier to entry for a lot of folks. Then like the architecture community broadly in Minnesota, I again think we're thinking forward, and we're rather good at, I think, showing at least the moment that we're like on the forefront. But I'm excited for, as Mary said, for action to follow aspiration, and all that, and that these things we're working on within AIA Minnesota and the kind of smaller community of culture change become just kind of table stakes for firms, that's just like the way we do things. Whereas I think we're just on the cusp of that right now. I think we're getting people involved, and we're getting people to understand what's at stake. But in terms of the way that we work, how we change the way we think about the profession and its role in the broader community, is it's almost there. I'm excited to keep pushing it, and know that it probably will never stop needing to be pushed. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sean. All right. Amber, I don't want to put you on the spot with these questions this morning, but at the very least, I want you to ground everybody in your role in the organization.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Amber Allardyce, Deputy Executive Director with AIA Minnesota. Also assist with some of the local chapter boards as well. And I think I would just echo everything that all of you had said, that you want the organization and the broader community to be known for.
Ditto to Amber, as always. And Amber works with the MAF, which
Yes,
is
thank you.
a lot of work. And after yesterday's, our recent meetings, it's getting bigger all the time. So that whole thing around capacity is just a real challenge. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, let's dig in. I have a big old slide deck. I'm gonna implore you to interrupt me as you need to, as you'd like to, because there's a whole lot in there, and I don't want to just be talking at you the whole time, but this is the time of year where we try to transfer that solid base of knowledge for you to turn to as you're starting your year and as you're serving in this role. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Find my deck. Okay. Oh my goodness. I've done a few of these this week and my brain is starting to, there you go. Yay. All right. So good governance. We talked about table stakes already. What is the basic sort of definition of good governance? It's always good to be attentive to these legal duties. This is the legal standard that is used to determine whether a board member individually or by extension the board has acted properly or improperly. And there are three duties here in this legal standard: duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Duty of care is a basic level of competence that an ordinarily prudent person would exercise in a like position and under similar circumstances. So the idea here is if you receive materials in advance, and we've been consistent over the past year in getting the board packet out to everyone, either the Friday before the board meeting, or in rare cases, there may be a couple of elements that come through on Monday or Tuesday before a board meeting. Those are again held on Fridays, that you're going to take the time to review that information. I know that you all are really busy people, and we want you to be busy in your work. We as a professional organization, that's important. But at the same time, in order to be efficient and effective, reviewing materials in advance really, really matters. And it is a basic legal duty when you serve as a board member. Duty of loyalty. This is why we ask you to fill out a conflict of interest form where you disclose other organizations that you are deeply involved in, where you either have a legal conflict of interest if you serve on multiple boards, for example, especially boards that may be operating sort of in the same space of serving the architecture community or the broader community. The idea here is that when voting, when making decisions affecting AIA Minnesota as an organization or the local chapters as organizations, they are separate organizations, separate 501c6 nonprofits, that you are voting in the interest of that organization and not another. The idea is to not use information for personal gain or for the interests of another organization. Duty of obedience is around commitment to the mission of AIA Minnesota. And as we'll see in a moment, it's actually a shared mission across the state and local chapters of AIA in Minnesota. This is to uphold the public's trust that the funds that are utilized by the organization are being put toward a nonprofit mission. This is the trade-off that we make when we are set up as a nonprofit organization. It means that we don't pay taxes, and in exchange, there's a commitment that our organization is fulfilling a public good. As 501c6 organizations, that public good is supporting a strong profession of architecture. So it's supporting the individual members of our organization and that broader nonprofit mission. The MAF as a 501c3 organization is a charitable foundation and serving the public good in a sort of broader way. The C6s are that particular designation because we are membership organizations. So that shared mission across the state and local chapters, our reason for existing is to advance a vital profession, vibrant communities, and architecture that endures. And so we are constantly striving to meet all aspects of that mission and take very seriously each element of this mission statement. There are also shared core values across the state and local chapters of AIA in Minnesota and the Minnesota Architectural Foundation, which is the charitable arm of AIA Minnesota. I'll just pause here to note that AIA Minnesota has what's called governance control over the MAF, where the AIA Minnesota board appoints a majority of the board members of the MAF board. It's why you also will see our audit as a consolidated audit of both of those organizations. So it's natural that we would be operating in ways that are synergistic and collaborative. And with our increasing levels of joint work, I think this becomes more and more true in the world. Our shared core values are authenticity, equity, collaboration, and integrity. Those first three values, authenticity, equity, and collaboration, are a recent sort of reinterpretation and restating of values that we've been operating under for about the past 8 years or so. They were restated to align exactly with what the Culture Change Initiative research with our AIA Minnesota membership defined as the markers of the culture that we're trying to create within the architecture profession. And the idea here is that if people's experience in engaging with AIA Minnesota as an organization, in our events, in our programming, and in our committees and boards, really exemplifies that desired culture that we're aiming for, it becomes more likely to be the norm in the profession itself, where people get used to this kind of experience of a culture, and they're able to bring that to their workplaces and to schools of architecture as well. We retained the core value of integrity, which had been said again about, I guess it's more like 7 years ago. Because it is the core value that we have found internally among the staff team to be most helpful in keeping us to the path that we've chosen. Sometimes there are hard choices to make, where we can be potentially pulled away from the core of our mission, or pulled away from what we have stated to be our values and our priorities. And it is that value of integrity that keeps us on the right path. We also have shared strategic priorities across all of the organizations. I think you all are familiar with these, but again, to reiterate, the 4 strategic priorities are to build and mentor the profession, make architecture accessible, understandable, and highly valued, to take immediate, bold action to address climate change, and to foster equity, belonging, and agency for women, people of color, and other marginalized groups. These strategic priorities for the Minnesota architecture organizations are very well aligned with AIA National's priorities. Those 2 priorities are climate action for human and ecological health, and to advance racial, ethnic, and gender equity. I'm going to pause for a moment and dig deeper into more of the governance aspects of your role. We'll turn a little bit later to the strategic plan and what is on tap for this year ahead. So an organization called Board Source is a nonprofit that focuses on promoting excellence in nonprofit board governance. And a few years ago, they sort of took a step back and looked at all of the guidance that they were giving to nonprofit boards and boiled it down to 12 core principles. And as I walk through these, I want you to think a little bit about with what you know of what is on tap for AIA Minnesota, with the aspirations that you're bringing to this work and what you've heard from other board members. Which of these 12 principles do you think we need to sort of hold most tightly or put extra attention to in this year ahead? So the first of these is constructive partnership. And what's meant by this is very specifically the partnership between the board and the executive director. And I would also say by extension, the AIA Minnesota staff team, to realize that this is a relationship that when it is going well, when it is robust and trustful and respectful, it can lead to great exploration of possibilities that any one group of us or any one individual might not come up with on their own or would have difficulty achieving on their own. So that board staff partnership, and in particular, the board executive director partnership, really matters in when it comes to excellence in board governance. Just a note here that as the executive vice president and executive director of AIA Minnesota, I am the sole sort of employee of the board. The board is responsible for the hiring and firing and evaluation of the executive director. The other members of the staff team are under my direction, and I have management responsibility related to their performance. And when it comes to the local chapters, there are no direct employees of the local chapters. All of the employees are under the umbrella of AIA Minnesota, and there is a contractual arrangement. And actually, I shouldn't even quite put it that way. I guess the memorandum of understanding could be thought of as the contractual arrangement between the state and local chapters. But there is a management fee that is paid by each local chapter to the state chapter for staffing. The next principle is being mission driven. And we think of this more than just alignment with the mission statement, but very much what is our mission impact and how are we constantly working to strengthen our impact in achieving that mission. Strategic thinking. The idea here is that strategic thinking is not just relegated to strategic planning retreats. Note that we may well pull together a strategic planning retreat at some point over the course of this year. A number of board members of the various chapters have raised this possibility. So know that that is coming. But also recognize that the more that we can be doing strategic thinking as part of our regular board work, the more impactful we can be. So that's why attention to the agendas of the state and local chapters really matters. It's hard to pull together our members to do the work of the boards. It can be hard to get folks to activate in between board meetings. So what happens in the board meeting itself should reflect some time for strategic thinking. A culture of inquiry. This is the idea of exhibiting curiosity, of establishing a culture of trust and respect that as a base that allows for a culture of candor and the ability for members of the board to disagree with each other and be able to do so in ways that are constructive and lead to better solutions. Independent mindedness. This is about recognizing that while AIA Minnesota has connection to a variety of organizations, as do the local chapters in the MAF, they are each separate nonprofit organizations. And with that in mind, they do need to make decisions in the interest of those organizations and their membership. Ethos of transparency. This is something that we've really tried to embrace, and it's not only true around financial transparency, but also in how decisions are made. For example, awards criteria and jury process and application processes. There's a lot that we've changed over the last few years to make our processes more transparent. And that is an approach that also is shown to further equity and representation in organizations. And I will also say too, one of the experiences that I often share here is when I joined a different association a few years ago as their executive director, I came on board and was told that the organization was actually in financial crisis, and the financials did not seem to indicate that, but it's the way that those financials were being presented. And both the financials themselves and the engagement with the board was obfuscating very real structural financial troubles that had been growing in the organization over the previous 5 years. That is not a situation that I ever want to be in again, walking into that kind of mess or put anybody else in. And I think that it's important for us all to be on the staff side, to be real with you all as board members of what our concerns are, what our real financial situation is, as opposed to not bothering you with those concerns as if they're simply those of the staff team. So that ethos of transparency, I hope really does pervade all that we do. Compliance with integrity is really around the documentation that we file with a variety of bodies, not just our audits, our Form 990s, that go to the federal government. Also things like our lobbying reports. All of these are documents that we take seriously and approach with that value of integrity. Sustaining resources. We've been talking a lot about this over the last couple of years with AI Minnesota in particular, where it's about sustaining the financial resources of the organization, but also the human resources, the time and energy of our volunteer leaders and our staff team. If we push ourselves too far on any of those three fronts, financial, volunteer, and staff resources, we get ourselves into situations that are not sustainable for the long term. And we have pushed ourselves a bit too far in the last few years. And we're in a similar kind of challenge today, and actively working toward a more sustainable approach all the way around. Results oriented, that it's not enough to simply go through the motions, not enough to simply say we had this many people attend this thing we did, but what difference did it make? How much of an impact, a mission impact did it further? Intentional board practices. Here again, it's not just going along with what we've always done because we've always done it, but being thoughtful and intentional about what is on the agenda of our board meetings, but also what are the intentions that we bring to how we engage in our work together. The spirit we bring to our work, the overall intentions we bring to how we work together. Continuous learning. This is around assuming that there's always something new to learn, and that once we learn something, that it needs to improve or shape how we think and how we operate. And revitalization. This is a core board member responsibility that relates to cultivating others to serve on the board and to serve in other roles in the organization. That when you leave the board, that you have done the work to bring others along and to take on the role that you are leaving, or otherwise take on leadership roles in the organization. There's only so much that's appropriate, frankly, for the staff to do in this regard. It really is a core aspect of board work. So with those 12, I am gonna just leave this up on the screen just so you've got it as a reference. I would welcome anyone's thoughts on which of these you are thinking needs to be particularly top of mind in this year ahead with our boards. And just jump on in because I can only hear you.
I'll jump in, and for me, this is both personal and something that I think applies to all of us. It's a culture of inquiry. I think that for me personally, I'm not afraid to bristle with people and to argue and make sure that my point of view is heard. But I think that the idea of this culture of inquiry, of constantly asking ourselves why, what's the reason behind it, what's our motivation, and there's a lot of things to be inquisitive about. But I think it will only serve as a really good foundation of growth. if we can stay in this idea of, you know, inquisitiveness. So like I said, both personal and something that I think that we as a board would benefit from.
Great, thank you.
If I were to jump in, I think maybe it's hard to pick one because these are all so important. But maybe three that are maybe related to kind of the things I had mentioned before, which are strategic thinking, culture of inquiry, and intentional board practices. I think they can all work in a nice little trifecta. To Amy's point of being open and honest, seeking deeper questions, being able to ask the questions that need to be asked, and how that will then push the way we strategically think about the things we do, like near far stuff in the classic MBA language, but also what are we doing then with our action, and then also the way that we deploy these thoughts amongst the people who are really getting the work done. Like we're in a meeting for an hour once a month, but how does that then percolate out to the rest of the folks that are really crushing it outside of us? So I think those three aligning together kind of get to that broader point that I was trying to make about keeping in the forefront that we still have a lot of work to do in the realm of equity in getting everybody moving in the right direction. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Sean.
I'll just jump in with a couple of comments here. I was thinking number 3 and number 9. My thinking is they're kind of interrelated. And since strategically we have put down 4 strategic priorities for AIA Minnesota, and my thinking is that results oriented, that line to me is more reflective of our 4 strategic priorities. So perhaps going forward, one thought I would throw out there is at every board meeting, maybe we have a point of discussion about the strategic priorities and how we have affected moving in the right direction on all 4 of those on a monthly basis.
Thank you, Ananth. I will just pause to say that I've been thinking about that too, of how do we best share back progress on the priorities and on the work plan. And I've been thinking the approach that we took when we were operating with a strategic work plan a few years ago, right before the pandemic, was a quarterly report that we were able to pull together. And I'll have to think about monthly versus quarterly and kind of what makes the most sense there. Because I could see value kind of pros and cons on either side of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Any other thoughts before we move on?
I would add just that number 6, ethos of transparency, just as a piece that we're being mindful that our members want to know, like, what's going on, like how do we do things, what are we working towards, and then especially I think with some of these things that tend to be opaque, that might historically have been opaque for reasons of exclusion, just to be mindful of those things and bringing our membership along all the way.
Yeah, and that is a real challenge in this communication sort of information saturated environment. And those of us who are closest to this stuff, sometimes just doing the work is its own thing. Communicating out the work can be a real challenge, and it can be frustrating because it seems like folks don't take it in. That it almost doesn't matter how much we communicate it. that it doesn't necessarily land or get across. So I think that's a broader challenge of the organization. I also want to come back to some of the other things that were mentioned around culture of inquiry, strategic thinking, and intentional board practices. So every board is different, right? You know, when you've got a third of the board that turns over each year, one of the things that we orient to each year as a staff team is that the sort of rhythm and nature of the board also shifts. And one thing that I'm already recognizing with this new board after the first meeting and in the executive committee engagements is people are bringing a strong culture of inquiry and intentionality to all that we're putting on the agenda. And that's what has made me even more conscious of where are we putting the board's time and attention. I'm loath to expand the time beyond 90 minutes that we already have right now, but it feels like we could expand each board meeting by another half hour to an hour in terms of the rich variety of perspectives and questions that board members are bringing. So it's a really great problem to have. And it means that we have to really be careful in choosing what are the agenda items that are going to most move us forward, and where is that inquiry and strategic thinking best applied in service to the organization and our priorities. Okay. So the core roles of board members relate to those principles of excellence in a lot of ways, but these are the things to realize, that as a board member, you hold all of these roles and you apply them in different contexts and in different times. And some of these you may be more inclined toward than others. Your energy may be better spent toward one or another of these. But by virtue of your role, you do hold all of these roles within it. So the first is steward, and this is really around the current resources of the organization, being a good caretaker of those resources. Investor is more the idea of, it's not just about today, it's also about what's next. And to recognize that the investments of the past are what have brought us to our current state, and the investments that we make today bring us to a desired future. All of the work that we're doing today related to culture change and equity in the profession and in the built environment is the result of investments of time and energy and dollars made years ago by these boards of directors. Resource. You know, as one of our colleagues from the Northern chapter was saying this morning, already someone has reached out to her as a board member with an inquiry around potential partnership with that Northern chapter. Know that you are a resource and are seen as a resource to the architecture community and beyond. And that's a role to understand and to own in being a direct resource or being a conduit to others within the AIA Minnesota staff or elected leaders who can answer questions and be an information hub and again, potential partner with others. The other side of that is proactive, and it's being an ambassador for the organization. It's seeking out opportunities to share what's going on in the organization, to cut through some of those communications challenges, and be an enthusiastic promoter of the good work that we're doing. and a connector to, again, the broader architecture community and the broader public. Cultivator, this is again around cultivating the people around you to be members of the organization, to be engaged in its activities, to be engaged in its volunteer leadership. And then advocate, and this can take the form of legislative advocacy. We have so many opportunities in that realm right now, especially this year and next year, where a lot of our priorities are aligned with the leadership of all three branches of state government. Not so much branches, sorry, all three legislative bodies, you know, the governor's office, the House and the Senate of the state legislature. There's also the opportunity to advocate at the local level to city government and county government and the Metropolitan Council in the context of the Twin Cities, and to advocate kind of with a small a for change within the profession, change in the way that the AEC industry operates. So that advocacy role is multifaceted, and again, one that we encourage you to own as your role as a board member. So for 2023, we could have a whole lot of slides that were just on this topic. I've just lifted up a few here. We'll talk a little bit more about the strategic work plan in a moment. But overall, the strategic work plan is the driving force of what we're doing as an organization, especially in the context of serving the membership. On the inside of the organization, we also have a variety of things that we're working on and things that you should be aware of. The number one area of attention really is financial stewardship of the chapters, where we've got continuing ripple effects from the COVID pandemic on in-person events, in particular the annual conference. I know we've talked about that a good bit already, but just recognize that challenge looms large. And as part of this, we're going to be taking a look at our overall business model and trying to understand how do we potentially evolve that business model toward to take into account a new normal that's starting to form post-pandemic. Also around member recruitment, we are making our way back from the loss of about 6% of our membership over the 2 years of the worst of the pandemic. That's typical for us in terms of recessions, to lose a little bit of membership and then to gain it back over the course of a few years following. What we have not been successful in doing is carving out time and attention to member recruitment, especially in demonstrating value and making connection with associate AIA members. Students upon graduation from accredited schools of architecture receive 18 months of free membership in the AIA. And we need to be doing more to make those 18 months a period of real connection with people. The St. Paul chapter has been doing some good work in reaching out to new members when they come on board. That's a really, really great start. And we need to figure out how to go beyond that initial welcome and introduction to sort of shepherding value and engagement from associate AIA members so that they stay with us. And frankly, so much of our strategic work plan is designed to benefit associate AIA members and people in their first 10 years of practice in architecture, that it's a good time for us to be able to make that outreach and increasingly demonstrate value there. We also have a task force that is kicking off in February, focused on the memorandum of understanding between the state and local chapters of the AIA in Minnesota. This is something that it's work that is foundational in the relationship between the state and local chapters financially in terms of staff time. And it also sets things like chapter boundaries. So it opens up conversations around how well the current structure of the state and local chapters is working. And are there alternative structures that may make more sense in serving our membership in the near and longer term? The members of that task force, I think, are primarily the treasurers and the past presidents of the state and local chapters. Is that correct, Amber?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So know that their work will begin soon. It'll take place over a good number of months. We are currently looking at sort of midpoint engagement with the various boards of directors around this. Also know that there is no real memorandum of understanding between the MAF and the state and local chapters. And there's some real opportunity there to recognize synergies, and the joint strategic work plan really sets the table for that. The JUST label, we have been working on this for a number of years. We are really at the point now where this can be submitted. I expect it will be submitted within the next few months. It's really a matter of carving out the staff time to fill out all the forms, put up all of our documentation. And Stacy and Amber have been leading a lot of this. And it's just, they both are pretty slammed these couple of months here. So I expect by the end of the first quarter that we'll be able to get that submitted. Once it is submitted, it's something that we hope and expect to promote to our membership, again, as trying to lead by example within the architecture community. We also are overdue for a website overhaul. We had a plan in place for how that would be done in 2022, and it just did not quite materialize. I'm going to be talking with staff about how might we move this forward, if not in whole, at least in part in 2023. But with so many other pressing priorities, it's easy for this one to kind of fall back again. Staff sabbaticals. In 2022, as an additional benefit and sort of recognizing the intense time that the staff had put in during the pandemic, the board approved a sabbatical policy. And we have 3 staff members who are taking sabbaticals in 2023, all staggered in a way to lessen the impact on the organization. Amber's will be first. And Amber, is that late March?
Yep, late March to early May.
Yes. And so that'll be a 6-week period that Amber is out. Mid-May through the July 4th holiday will be when I am out. And then Chris Hudson will be taking a sabbatical as well. Once the print annual for Enter is out the door. And when he's back in that mode of the every other week responsibility, that's a good time for him to be able to do so. This is something available to staff after they've been with the organization for more than 7 years. We have, thankfully, a staff team that have been with us, almost all of them, for that period of time or much, much longer. And so we're trying to keep the number of sabbaticals in any one year to 3 or less. I think that will be true for 2024 as well. But know that that is something that we'll be working through as a staff team too. Before I move into the strategic work plan, I just want to pause, stop sharing for a moment and check in with you all. We've been at this for about an hour. And so I want to just see your faces again, first of all, and just ask if folks have questions on what you've seen so far.
Can you just kind of like lightly define the memorandum of understanding just for someone who's fresh to it, and then kind of how that works between the chapters?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a little while since I've taken a look at the document. Amber, I don't know if you've looked at it more recently. But the key, it really is the basis for how our state and local chapters work together. And we're kind of unique around the country in how we're structured and how we operate. I actually don't know of another set of state and local chapters that has a joint strategic work plan, joint mission statement, joint values. And when it comes to the same staff team serving all state and local chapters in a state, that's also kind of unusual. They're probably, I think there might be now 4 around the country that's true. It's 3 or 4. And it has to do with how the dues from national are structured in a way. It also has to do with how revenue sharing from national is distributed, with what sort of basis and formula. It also has to do with what is the primary purpose of the local chapters in relation to the state chapter. So for example, I think that the MOU puts a focus on the local chapters as being social connection. And after the pandemic, it's a good time for us to sort of revisit what that looks like, especially since we've been more challenged to get people out and engaged in in-person activities. Trying to think some of the other elements of that MOU, Amber.
Yeah, it kind of, like you said, it identifies which resources and which services we provide to the members as to which ones are covered mainly by the state, and which ones are kind of up to the local chapters to address those member value and member resources. So for instance, like continuing education for us is it's the state kind of covers that for the entire state of members, where the local chapters then can focus on some of those other areas, and not so much and try to do all of it, and have the state do everything and the local chapters try to do everything. So it does help in that aspect.
There are certain aspects about it too, where the interrelationship, it's it is a little bit of systems thinking, right? Where if you change one aspect of that relationship that's laid out in that MOU, it has implications for the rest of the operation and how it works. One of the questions that's opened up, less in the context of the MOU specifically, but in the context of a potential MOU between the MAF and the state and local chapters, is what happens with the golf event? Should that remain an AI Minneapolis event, or should that actually become an event of the Minnesota Architectural Foundation because its purpose is to raise money for the foundation? That's almost the only reason why it exists. And so if we were to make that shift, there are a whole lot of implications that relate to staff time and how that's covered and by which entity. And it may seem like it's freeing up, time and resources for the Minneapolis chapter, when it actually probably would not at all. It probably would not have any impact in that way. It would just be, in the list of activities, there might be greater alignment but to realize that you're not going to gain capacity. So those kinds of analyses are required when we look at potential changes to the relationship between the state and local chapters and when we bring MAF into the mix. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to reorient us to what we've got on tap for the strategic work plan this year. Because it's a lot, and it's a lot for me to even keep in my head. So it's never too many times, I think, to actually like look at the whole and realize what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, there we go. So overall, the joint strategic plan objectives underneath those four strategic priorities are to strengthen the business, working conditions, and culture of architecture, make design for climate change foundational, expand member impact beyond buildings and for greater public benefit, expand access to the profession, and to scale back to gain capacity. So these are kind of the through lines that in some ways connect across multiple of those strategic priorities. So for the AIA St. Paul chapter in this year ahead, they're going to be focusing very specifically on mentorship. They're going to be taking the lead on this. For the early part of 2023, for example, one of their sort of food for thought gatherings, events that they'll be putting on is focused on assessing the current state of mentorship in the profession, being real about what's true right now, and then defining what is it that we're aiming for with mentorship. What's the best of what this can be? And then very much the work of that group will be around how can we start to seed and cultivate that ideal kind of mentorship throughout the profession. For AI Minneapolis, their focus is really twofold right now. It's their Building Green initiative, which is meant to encourage small firms to make sustainable climate-oriented design foundational to how they operate. There's a real jumpstart that's needed with our smaller firms who don't have the capacity to have a specialist within their team. And also the continuation of the History, Hurdles, and Hope effort that's been going on for a few years, informed by the experiences of community leaders in areas affected in the unrest, to advocate for public policies that help to make sustainable, resilient, regenerative design foundational. There's another priority that this also relates to, but we are working closely with the Center for Sustainable Building Research in that History, Hurdles, and Hope initiative to that end. And then the Northern chapter is meeting in just a couple of weeks for their strategic planning session, where they will determine what aspect of the joint strategic work plan they're going to be focusing on in 2023. For context, also the MAF is really focusing on key aspects of the joint strategic work plan, expanding access to the profession, very deliberately related to expanding awareness of the profession and how it has an impact, and growing that connection for people of all incomes and geographies. Here, this is initiating high school outreach related to the Wigington scholarships, especially in the context of Dunwoody's architecture program, where because it's a 5-year licensure upon graduation program, these scholarships really would be available to people coming out of high school. So there's great opportunity there, and that's a new opportunity for the MAF. Also, the Women in Architecture Fund grants and support for Wigginton scholars requires working to mitigate and remove the barriers to both joining and remaining within their profession that people who are underrepresented tend to experience. When it comes to strengthening the business working conditions and culture of architecture, mentorship, again, is a real focus here, where the MAF is wanting to do more than just provide financial support for Wigginton scholars, but also provide holistic mentorship and community building support. I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting, but Ellie Ziai, who's in the Next to Lead program at the AI national level, is going to be focusing specifically on this in conjunction with MAF. So then for AI Minnesota, under the objective of strengthening the business working conditions and culture of architecture, we're going to be focusing on augmenting the business acumen of members at all career stages. I meant to put equip, forgive me. Equipping members to recognize and not undermine their own worth, and strengthening both individual and firm prosperity. We have been in communication with NCARB around the content that they have sort of hidden behind a access wall that was developed for pro-practice students, but we think really could be of great benefit to our members. Also, we will be developing continuing education programs, certainly as part of the annual conference, but potentially outside the annual conference as well. Focusing specifically on those first few years out of architecture school, we'll be focusing both continuing education and that NCARB outreach to that particular population. In terms of supporting the development of mindsets and practices that accelerate that desired culture of the profession that's authentic, equitable, and collaborative, the Community of Practice for Culture Change this year is going to be working on and working with supports that we provide to them to bring the approaches that we've been doing within the community of practice into firms. We also are going to be doing that in a way that is a deep dive approach to accelerating equity in the profession through a firm culture change pilot, where we're seeking a couple of firms that would work with us, where we would be providing consulting to them in really understanding the culture change initiative research and applying its findings along the lines of what's been happening in the community of practice to a whole firm. So more to come on that front. Also, we are implementing at least one, potentially more, in-firm implementations of the Foundations for Intercultural Development program. And then the JUST label, which I mentioned earlier. Under the objective of making design for climate change foundational, we have a lot going on right now related to advocating for public policies that make sustainable, resilient, regenerative design foundational. Our Government Affairs Committee and a variety of individuals are actively engaged in conversations with legislators on this. We have a meeting later today that also relates to the History, Hurdles, and Hope project and how those community insights can help inform our advocacy work in this realm. In addition to the Building Green effort of the Minneapolis chapter. And I realize I didn't describe that earlier when I mentioned it. We're going to be needing to do a lot to get our members throughout Minnesota to take advantage of the access to the Building Green website resources that we have made available to them through a partnership, a financial partnership of the local chapters. In addition to Building Green, the Code Committee will also be looking at this, in particular related to firms that are larger in nature. Building Green is specifically, that's specifically been initiated with smaller firms in mind, but we know that additional work is needing within mid-sized and large firms too. And in terms of bringing forward stories from members, firms, and clients that exemplify the challenges related to making climate change foundational to architecture and inspire solutions there, we'll be doing more in Enter, both the biweekly and the print annual. When it comes to expanding member impact beyond buildings and for greater public benefit, we will be working to strengthen shared understanding of what equity in the built environment means and how to create it, both through the efforts of the Equity in the Built Environment Committee. And we're going to have an article in Enter that really works to define what we mean when we say equity in the built environment. I should note that the History, Hurdles, and Hope effort is branching really into two lanes. One is the legislative advocacy side, and the other is a more community and grassroots approach. That grassroots approach is particularly focused in this realm, where we get out of some of this language like equity in the built environment, where both aspects of that phrase are actually pretty opaque and academic and heady, and aren't really rooted in the everyday language and experience of community members. So that's what the that other branch of the History, Hurdles, and Hope effort will focus on. Demonstrating how members can add value beyond buildings. This year, we're going to be trying to tackling that through Enter. And then that multi-sector change agenda to promote development that's healthy, equitable, and environmentally just. The History, Hurdles, and Hope effort will leverage our 21st century development framework in that work. And in expanding access to the profession. When it comes to expanding awareness of the profession and the impact architecture can have on people's lives and planet, and in particular, growing connection and agency for people of all incomes and geographies to feel related to their built environment. The North Star Story Map project, which is a collaboration with Minnesota Historical Society and Mill City Museum, we're going to be seeking legacy grant dollars to continue to support that work and expand that work, and really support partnerships with groups like Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Girl Scouts, to senior centers and broader community organizations and libraries. When it comes to K-12 outreach, we've had a group of staff and volunteer leaders working over the last year plus to evaluate what we've done over time and make recommendations for where we go next. That will likely come forward within the next few months to the board, and there will be sort of a rebooting of that effort in new ways starting later this year. And then when it comes to mitigating and removing financial, cultural, and procedural barriers to joining and remaining in the profession, this is a year that we see as strategy development and consensus building related to alternative paths to licensure in Minnesota, and potentially bringing back paths that have been closed off and used to exist that allow for example, people to work under the direction of a licensed architect for a number of years without having a NAB accredited degree, and then take the exams and be able to become a licensed architect. There are a variety of people whose life circumstances and situations make it such that that sort of path would be their best way to become licensed. And then finally, in the context of all of that, this just all does seem incredibly challenging, but at the very least this year, we will be analyzing our programs and approaches with the idea of how might we scale things back to be able to make our financial, volunteer, and staffing resources more sustainable for the long term. The analysis has begun to this end. A matrix map, which really shows the level of mission impact and the amount of time and dollars put toward each of our programs and services, has been developed. And we will be sharing that with the board of directors at some point as well. One other idea here is looking at whether common practice in other AIA chapters around the country is something that might make sense here, where we would have liaison positions among board members to really augment the work of the staff team. There are pros and cons to that. And it's something that we would need to sort of think through of whether that would actually gain capacity or make or would simply just expand the regular burden that volunteers and staff are experiencing. So it's something that seems on the face of it like a great idea, and in practice, it may not be the most efficacious solution. Okay, I'm going to pause for a couple minutes here, and oh, I'm just going to try to stop sharing. Oh, it's asking me if I want to do a new share. That's a little bizarre. How about oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to check in on, hello, Anjali, welcome. I'm going to check in on that big blast of information I just gave you related to the strategic work plan. That's not new information, but it is a lot, and it's a lot for us to kind of keep all in front of us at the same time. But I guess what I want to emphasize is that all of those efforts are moving forward right now, everything that I've just mentioned. And it's because we've got so many different groups that are working on this in one way or another. There are obviously sort of synergies and connections among those different efforts. For example, between the MAF and the AIA St. Paul chapter, that one's a really obvious one, but there are also interconnections that we haven't perhaps, illuminated entirely yet. I want to pause and ask questions that you have about the implementation of the strategic work plan this year.
I'll chip in here. I really applaud the way we want to approach the 4 strategic work plans, but I think I've said this a couple of times before, Margaret. Applaud trimming expenditures and scaling back, but I think for the long-term success of AIA Minnesota, we also need to be looking at revenue growth.
Yep.
And I know the last meeting, there were some references to approaching organizations for grants and things like that. So I just want to emphasize that we need to be looking at both. I mean, both the scaling back as well as the revenue growth, because on a long-term basis, there are expenditures that are going to grow, which is staff expenditures in terms of salaries. That there's no controlling that. That is going to grow. So if revenue is fixed, we're going to come to a point where we really are going to be at a fork. What are we going to do? So both needs to happen, both revenue growth as well as trimming expenditures.
I so appreciate that, Ananth, and you're absolutely right. I think we are at that point, frankly. The fact that we had to the fact that even with some pretty ambitious revenue enhancement goals within the budget, we had to keep the staff increase to one that was even less than the inflationary increase with the dues. That was a 7.5% increase. The staff salary increase was 5.5%. That is not sustainable. And the only way we get there is to actually both scale back strategically, but also figure out where additional revenue is going to come from. And it's a really, really challenging question. And it is why business model review and potential, shifts to that business model are critical. So we'll be kind of taking a macro view of that, as well as sort of what's typical around that is for organizations to just do brainstorming around ideas for non-dues revenue. That's helpful, but it only gets you so far. Looking at the business model itself, I think is a critical element.
Yeah, I think like I said, we're aspirational around here. We want to get a lot done because we know there's a lot to do. But the bandwidths of everyone involved are limited, even if you are working on it full time, like the AIA staff. And so the less work, more impact, I think, really boils down to how we can be effective in our relational communication and working together. So but it seems like we have a great group, and we have had great groups that have set a good foundation for that. So
yeah, Sean, I appreciate that. And I think some of the work that we've done around systems thinking with the culture change initiative can really apply here, where we take that lens to what we're doing and say, are we trying to affect change at the most impactful leverage points, right? Or are we pushing against leverage points where we have to put a whole lot of effort in for anything to move? Less work, more impact is it's that holy grail, right? We want to be able to get there.
Mary Margaret, since membership dues are quite a big part of the revenue stream that comes in, have we maximized, or are we close to maximizing the number of members that we could have who are part of the AIA?
This is a real issue. It's something we have struggled to make time for in the midst of everything else. We've relied on, as an organization, on the sort of typical 1% growth year over year that we've experienced without focusing specifically on membership development. It's been really a philosophy of saying, if we do really good work, people will come, right? And that is a philosophy that I think we may have to move away from. The challenge is that the time to do that membership work then takes away from, if you see it as a fixed pie, which I'm not sure we necessarily have to view it that way, but in the near term, without the prospect of being able to add additional staff, from a staffing standpoint, that time has to come from where? And so where does that come from? And if instead, it's something that is very much a volunteer effort, what are the kinds of investments that we can make in terms of procedures and materials and supports and expectations of volunteer leaders to help in that work? There is no volunteer effort that doesn't involve staff time. That's just something I have learned over 30 years of working with associations. We can get really aspirational and thinking, oh, we'll just take this off of staff. Doesn't happen. So then the question is, how do we fuel that in a way that has the right trade-offs in terms of time and money, and materials? I realize we're at 10:01. I encourage you to look at those last few slides of the slide deck that Amber either has sent to you already or will send to you. It's just an orientation to what's in your packet. There are a couple of things that you need to sign and turn back to us. And Amber will be sending you something to make that extra easy as well. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to orient to this. And more importantly, thanks so much for the time and energy and goodwill that you're bringing to this work. I can't tell you how much I enjoy working with you all. It is truly a joy. And I'm excited for this year and all that we're going to accomplish together.
Thank you, Mary Margaret and Amber.
Very happy.